Welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast with Ani and Brian. Join us as we explore the art and science of trauma-sensitive somatic practices and tools to strengthen your practice as a coach, therapist, or holistic professional. Master the art of motivating even the most challenging clients when you'll understand how to tap into and unlock your client's complete holistic intelligence. If you want to learn the most cutting-edge, research-supported skills for personal and professional mastery, you've come to the right place. Let's get this conversation started.
Hi, and welcome to the Somatic Coaching Academy podcast. Hey there, Brian.
Hello, Ani.
You know, we have been talking about centering and core centering. We're going to talk about it again today. I just want to make sure if you're listening that you've heard that we are so excited. The Somatic Coaching Academy is going to be at the world-renowned Kripalu Center for Yoga and Health here in the beginning of June 2024. We're going to be doing our core centering training there live and in person. And we are so excited to be at Kripalu. If you've been to Kripalu before, you know how special it is. And if you haven't been to Kripalu before, it's one of those places where it's this world-renowned retreat center where people go to do somatic practices and other reflective. I was going to say contemplate. How do you say contemplative? Contemplative.
Yeah, contemplative.
Contemplative. That I was having trouble with the candor, anyway, of that. So it's a place where people go to reflect and to contemplate and to learn and to grow. And the people there are amazing. And the grounds there are beautiful. The things that you learn at Kripalu are just so wonderful. It's the kind of thing where you go and you take it away with you and it lingers and it's lovely. Their food is also really great. We love the cafeteria and the locally sourced food and things like that at Kripalu. Especially their rice cakes. We have a joke that we like to make Tai Chi yin yang symbol rice cakes with the peanut butter and jelly at Kripalu. So we hope that you are considering joining us at Kripalu this June for the core centering training. So today we get to talk more about centeredness, don't we, Brian?
Yeah, centered leadership today we're talking about. And let's just jump right into it. The idea, for those of you who work in organizations or you are a leader in an organization, and what's an organization? It could be a school, it could be a business, it could be a corporation, it could be your family, it could be whatever. Anytime we're working with other people, we're in some type of organization. And so the idea of centered leadership is, as a leader in an organization, listen, we've all worked in, well, maybe not all of us, but a lot of us have worked in organizations where the leader was not centered. And just think about the level of disruption that has on the whole organization. When the person you're looking to for feedback, for guidance, for focus, for support is not centered, and they are having trouble managing themselves and their own responsibilities and their own lives, it's very difficult to have a productive work environment that way.
It really is. I had a boss when I was working in healthcare who you never knew who was going to come through the door in the morning. And the rest of the team got there before her. And we also never knew what time she was going to show up. Sometimes she would show up at 8:30. Sometimes she wouldn't show up until 11. And so we would get there, we would say hi, we'd start our work, and then we would start to get hyper vigilant. Like our whole systems were bracing for when she was going to come and what kind of, I'll just say like mood she was going to be, like what kind of energy she was going to, what problem she was dragging in. We have a colleague who did a paper on evil bosses. I thought it was so much fun. And it was very cathartic to talk about this time in my life. It was really challenging for the whole team.
For the whole team. So whatever's going on with the leader, whether they're chronically evil or whether they're just having a really hard time.
Yeah.
When they're not centered, it ripples down through everybody in the organization who has at least direct contact with that person and with the jobs that they're able to do. So this idea of centered leadership isn't new by any means. But there's some really interesting research that an organization called Bain Company did. And so Bain Company did some research. They interviewed 2,000 employees. They did interviews and kind of feedback forums and those kinds of things. So it was pretty detailed, the methodology that they went through. And they identified 33 statistically significant traits of a inspiring leader. So they're specifically asking their employees about the traits of an inspiring leader.
They were trying to get some data on, right, like what it was that if we could nail it, this is what makes an inspiring leader all the time. So we can just figure out that trait or those 2 things or 5 things or whatever it is and just like reproduce that, right?
Yep, exactly. So they interviewed 2,000 people and 33 traits rose to the surface from 2,000 interviews. So you can imagine 2,000 interviews, you're going to get a lot of different traits, but these 33 statistically stood out from the other traits. And these 33 traits were then categorized into 4 different quadrants, if you want to think about it like that. And so the first quadrant was, and these quadrants aren't necessarily in a hierarchy, they're not better than the other, but these are basically the 4 quadrants that these 33 traits fall into to make an inspiring leader. Okay, so the first quadrant was connecting with others. And these traits were things like humility and expressiveness. Kind of think about those sorts of things. That's the idea of connecting with others. That's the box number 1. And box number 2 was leading the team. So you can think about these as kind of like the capacity to give direction, have vision for where we're going. Like those are, I think that quadrant is kind of what we typically think about in terms of a leader in that area. So that's that box. Okay, so far we have connecting with others and leading the team. All right, the next box was called setting the tone. And this box was things like openness and shared ambition. Kind of think about, there's this word I learned a long time ago, and when I was working at my favorite hospital that I worked at way back when, and it was a word called the milieu. And when I first heard it, I was like, what the heck does that mean?
It's fun to say.
Yeah.
It's almost as fun as contemplative.
And I had to go and like look it up. And what's milieu mean? And it's the environment. It's the broth. It's the broth of the soup that it kind of makes the soup, right? That's kind of like the milieu. So this idea of setting the tone kind of struck me as the milieu sort of thing. The idea of openness, shared ambition, that sort of thing. And then the final quadrant was developing inner resources. And so these are things like stress tolerance, flexibility, resilience. Those things kind of fit into that box. So of all 33 traits, all of them are going to fit into one of those 4 boxes.
We actually have a picture of the thing that you're talking about on our website. It's if you go to the website and go to programs and you look up the core centering program or the Somatic Practice Essentials program, you click on that, then you scroll down on the page and you'll be able to see exactly what Brian's talking about.
Yeah, there's an image right there of it. And what was really interesting is right in the center of all of the traits, there's one trait to rule them all. Think about Lord of the Rings, right? So there's one trait to rule them. There's one trait that locked them all together that, not surprisingly, was right in the middle of all these traits, which was the trait of centeredness.
And they found that different leaders who would be considered inspiring had all of these different attributes, but the one attribute that they all shared was centeredness.
And so this attribute, in follow-up research that Bain Company did, this was actually the attribute that was the most desired by emerging leaders.
Oh, really?
To develop. was the idea of centeredness.
Did they call it by that? Did they say that in the
I
article?
didn't look deep enough into that study to understand like how they actually did the methodology for it. That was just a reporting of the study.
They actually, Bain Company has a few subsequent studies based off of this information. So one of the things that when I read the study for the first time, other than being like, Brian, you've got to read this, was what the heck did they mean when they said centeredness?
Correct.
Do you have it written down?
I do. Yeah.
I'm sure you
So for them, the definition of centeredness, as far as the Bain and Company article is engaging all parts of the mind to become fully present.
I love the definition. Tickles me.
Yeah.
I love it so much. I love one of the reasons why I love it is because they say mind, and I'm back here being like, mind and all of the things that mind means, not just brain.
Engaging all parts of the mind, right? Yeah.
All parts of the mind, the body, the spirit, the mental, emotional, the gut, the intuition, the heart, all aspects of mind, which, by the way, I think is really like true intelligence. I don't think it's, I wouldn't say it's somebody's IQ. It's really somebody's ability to tap into all aspects of intelligence that we have access to.
Complete human intelligence.
That's a great tagline. Reminds me of something. Oh, right.
I've heard that before.
Ours.
Somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, all complete human intelligence. And then if you just read the first part of that, though, you're like, wow, tapping into engaging all aspects of mind or whatever. But to what? Why? To what end?
To become fully present.
To become fully present. When we're fully present as leaders, anything is possible. Anything is possible.
And what does that look like to be fully present?
Great question.
How would we know when someone's fully present?
I talk about this kind of thing with my clients all the time. And I've personally found that the flavor of it can be a little bit different from person to person. I would say that, of course, because I'm very into like individualization. So the way that I've noticed it comes up with people to be fully present is to like kind of a few key things to be able to listen, to be able to be curious, to be embodied and not just coming from a headspace, to not be in a place of reaction, but rather from a place of response. But to also be in one's purpose, like to really truly be in one's purpose. When I ask clients about this idea of being present, also kind of comes up because the things that they say that are a little bit different really point to who they are. And I would assert as a leader that to be fully present is about being in and on our own purpose and allowing the people around us to be fully in theirs as well. Because when we do that, it requires us to listen and be open and curious and not reactive, but responsive and all of those things to really create like unprecedented amounts of innovation, unprecedented amounts of motivation and energy and all of the things that we aspire to when we lead teams.
I love all those definitions. And if I may build on those a little bit, I think there's also some qualities about this humility of certainty. So as a leader, it's really important that we have certainty in where we're moving, but a sense of humility with it. So it's not an egoic certainty, but there's a humble certainty to be able to guide that direction.
I just read a really interesting article. I remember I didn't tell you about that was talking about humility and how it's so important for leadership. And they found that here back to the body and the importance of the body, that people who have bowing as some kind of part of their daily life or practice, like if they're bowing, for example, because they're doing yoga practice or they bow to people, that bowing actually is a somatic practice that lends itself to a person who is more humble.
Interesting.
Yeah. And their leadership. I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. And so thanks for sharing that. I'm going to want to get that study from you later.
You can bow to me anytime you want.
Thanks. Oh boy.
I will bow back to you, Brian.
Open that door. Open that door up. So we have this idea of certainty and also confidence too, but in the same aspect. The confidence is there's a humbleness to it, that there's as a leader, it's important to have certainty and also confidence that the team, we can do this together. We can move this forward. We can create this initiative. We can create this product or this plan or get this done or create the environment or whatever it is. So this idea of certainty and confidence is also a really important part of centeredness. And I like to just think that even builds a little bit further. And you mentioned this a little bit, was a sense of coherence also.
Yeah.
So as leaders, to have a sense of coherence with their team, there's been lots of research to show that teams that when they work very closely together, like surgical teams that have worked together a lot, and they start to be able to read each other's minds, so to speak, in terms of scalpel. They don't even have to ask for the scalpel. They don't have to, they know exactly what to do. That when their skin galvanic responses match up, like the electrical activity on their skin becomes the same. Their brain waves synchronize. So they're coming into coherence. So teams that are highly functional become literally their physiology and their brainwave activity becomes the same.
Do you think that happens to us?
I probably. Get out of my head, honey.
Get out of my brainwaves.
Exactly.
But so another interesting thing about leadership and coherence is that actually, in terms of coherence, the leader energetically will be the person who has the most consistent energy about themselves. Yeah. So if you've ever been on a team where there's somebody with a title of like team leader or manager, CEO or whatever, and there's this person who is like chronically annoying or chronically, complaining or something, guess who is probably leading, like actually leading, not from a title standpoint, but actually leading the energy of the group.
Right.
So coherence is so, it's a Jedi skill. It's so powerful as a leader to be able to harness one's own centeredness so that even in the midst of other folks who have powerful energy, we can still energetically lead the group into coherence.
Yes. And I would like to promote the idea that coherence is rooted in the body. It's rooted in our physiology.
Why would you say that, Brian?
Because it's how we feel that makes it real. It's what we feel that makes it real. And we might say that we're confident with our mouths, but if our legs are like jelly, then that is essentially what's going to be propagated or what's the word I'm looking for?
What's the vibrational frequency?
Yeah, it's going to be shown to other people, projected to other people, right? So we might say one thing, but our subconscious minds are reading subconscious minds. And what's really going to be projected is what's going on in your body.
Well, it's that idea that communication is actually, I don't have the exact, is it 4%, 7%? Maybe it's 7% of what we say. Communication is only 7% what we say. It's 93% all the other things.
Yeah, it's a lot nonverbal.
Right. And nonverbal isn't just body language. Nonverbal is also vibrational.
Yes. Yes, exactly. What someone actually feels when they're around you or when you're around them.
Yeah, especially when other folks are highly sensitive or empathetic or whatever. Like, and the crazy thing about that is that people could be picking up on the vibration or they're feeling something, but then we as humans make meaning about what we think that is. And so all of a sudden there's like an elephant in the room and it's the frequency, but everybody's making different meaning off of it. That's nuts. And it's so true.
Yeah, it's
but the
true.
Centered leader can actually bring a team into coherence. And then all of a sudden other people feel better, do better, and et cetera, et cetera. They don't even know why. And they
Exactly.
don't care, by the way, because they're happier, they're more joyful, they're more readily able to handle challenges that come up.
More
They're
productive.
more productive, more
Yep.
motivated, more relaxed. Yeah.
All those things.
Uh-huh.
And this is why it's so important when we think about the idea of a centered leader. So how do we get there? So we know the traits now, and this idea of centeredness is so important, and all these other traits also. So what we approach it from the idea of the core centering for leadership.
So I just want to say this for a second. You get there by practicing it.
Exactly.
You get to centeredness by practicing it. And sometimes I have this conversation with clients all the time. I'll say, how often do you practice centeredness? And they go, what do you mean? We practice what we want to get good at. If you want to learn to play the piano, you have to practice, because otherwise you'll sit at the piano and you won't be able to play. And we don't say to ourselves with something like the piano, why can't I play the piano? Why isn't it making beautiful music? We know, well, it's not making beautiful music because I haven't practiced. It's not making beautiful music because I don't know how to read the music, and I don't know how to make it work on my fingers, and I don't know how to play the piano. But we don't think about that when it comes to stuff like centeredness, but it's the same thing.
Same thing.
You have to practice. And in order to practice, you need to know what practice is to practice.
So let's talk about the practices to practice.
Okay.
I love that. It's a great segue. Core centering. When we talk about practicing core centering, this is why we're so excited that people are bringing core centering into organizations and doing it with leadership teams, with teams in general, with emerging leaders, because this is how you get to these traits and how you develop centeredness. It's really, really critical to think about this. And all of these traits, when we go back to the Bain article, 33 traits, right? All these traits, if you look at them, they all span across the idea of having a healthy and optimally regulated nervous system. So none of these traits are possible if your nervous system is dysregulated. Again, why I would suggest that this is rooted in the body.
Right.
Because if we have a dysregulated nervous system, doesn't mean that we're thinking about being open, or we're thinking about we're dysregulated. That's what our nervous system will focus on, trying to get back in regulation, not our higher cognitive functions.
Yeah. And in order to aspire to and work towards having a regulated nervous system, you need to know what it looks like and feels like to be dysregulated and regulated, so you can identify that. It's one of the reasons why we talk about things like window of tolerance actually in all of our programs, because you're not going to be able to elicit change in your life, whether you're doing it from a body somatic practices kind of place, or from a mind somatic intelligence kind of place, or from a how do I live into my most purposeful best self kind of more spiritual nature kind of place, if you don't have a regulated nervous system.
Absolutely. So what I'd like to do, Ani, is actually kind of talk about this in each one of these quadrants. So the first quadrant we talked about was connecting to others, or connecting with others. And one of the elements is empathy. Empathy is one of the traits that is within that category of connecting with others. We think about, well, what's required for empathy? What's required for empathy? When we think about this through the core centering program, one of the things we do a lot of is working on vagal toning and helping people to stimulate and strengthen their ventral vagal complex.
I'm helping you strengthen your vagal complex right now.
You are, by being empathetic?
I'm smiling.
You're smiling.
And I'm touching you nicely.
Right. So there's, and that's because you practice the centering practices a lot, right? I mean, because you, like we were talking about, you have that practice capability. And so we have to have that ventral vagal complex resilience, the capacity to activate that part of your vagus nerve system and that part of your brain, and how it connects with all the other parts of your body. If you can't do that, then empathy is going to be, if not difficult, impossible for a person. And that's the thing we spend a lot of time on with the core centering practices, is strengthening the ventral vagal complex pathways.
Great. What else?
Yeah. All right. What else? Okay. So the other kind of block was leading the team. So that was the other quadrant. And one of the traits within that is the idea of focus, to be able to focus so that you can lead the team.
That makes sense. I think, so often in leadership, it's not like you're leading a group of people on a bright sunny day down a path that's fully paved. It's like finding your way through the jungle, or when it's cloudy and you can't see, or you're bushwhacking. If you don't live in the woods like us, bushwhacking is this thing where you're like, there is no path. Boy, I don't like bushwhacking at all, Brian. It's just you get out like stuff on your legs and it bothers me. But that's what it feels like when you're leading a team very often. It's not like that sunny walking down the street kind of thing. It's like bushwhacking.
Yeah, bushwhacking. And you still have to have focus, right? It's like, okay, so we're moving in this direction. We're going to stay focused, and we're going to stay focused to get over the trees and around the vines and stay away from the poison ivy. Like all that stuff requires focus and planning. So the whole idea of focus really engages the medial prefrontal cortex. This is the human part of the brain. We're mammals, and the cortex is the part of the brain that has developed in humans more so than in mammals. And it's the part of our brain that allows us to reason and plan, project forward, or change our behavior now to get a different result in the future. Like that's all kind of this idea of focus and planning is a part of the prefrontal cortex.
And that's the same part that's offline.
That's the same part that goes offline when we're bushwhacking. We don't like it. And we're pissed about bushwhacking. We don't like getting stuff on us. We got the mud, right? Our prefrontal cortex is offline because we feel threatened. We feel unsafe in the woods, all those kinds of things.
And oftentimes we don't know that we're offline either, which is like a key feature of being truly offline is you think that you're online and you think that you are focused, but in reality, your system is focused on safety.
Correct.
And threat. And it's not actually conscious focus. It's really full subconscious, unconscious focus.
Right. Yeah. It's not creative focus. It's more exactly what you said.
You cannot have a creative focus if your nervous system isn't regulated.
Correct. Yeah.
Your physiology, if your physiology isn't regulated, I just want to be very clear. Like it's not just a mental state.
Exactly. And you won't be capable of even performing that mental state, like you just said, if your physiology is dysregulated.
It's such a dangerous.
And people try to think, oh, I'm going to just think harder.
You really
I'm going
do,
to just knuckle down my thinking. Or even if you can do that, you're still not nearly as effective. Not even close.
Not even close, because as you try to solve problems and meet challenges, you're actually meeting those challenges from the same vibrational frequency that the challenges were created. So you're going to keep creating eventually the same challenges. It really is such a dangerous place to allow oneself to be in as a leader, because we think that we can muscle through, or we think that we've got it, but because we're mentally focused or whatever. But if your physiology is dysregulated, if your physiology is not in homeostasis, you will not be able to think of the creative and use your brain and all your creative faculties to think of the creative, different vibrational, next level vibrational frequency idea, so that you don't keep creating the same problems. I think this is one of the reasons why we see over and over and over again in organizations, they invest billions of dollars in training and coaching and all of these kinds of things to do new initiatives. And then the initiatives don't move the needle. Why doesn't the needle move? It's because we're trying to create from a place where we're not really paying attention to our physiology first. If we paid attention to our physiology, we'd be able to move the needle, not just once, over and over and over again. Yeah. You did tell me I was going to get on a little bit on a soapbox.
I told you you were going to love this one,
topic,
Ani. I said, Ani's going to love this podcast. So we're just going to keep it rolling.
It really bothers me when people continue to invest and the needle doesn't move. It's like the itchy thorns in the bushwhacking. Like it really bothers me because there's a better way. It doesn't have to be like that. We can actually create change. And not only can we create change, but we can create change in a way that feels good and we're nice to people. We think that change needs to be created by dragging people around or dragging people in or making people do things or incentivizing or dangling carrots or whatever. It doesn't have to be like that. Okay, where
all right, here we go. Okay. So what we're talking about here is a roadmap. We're talking about a roadmap to become an inspiring leader. That's really what we're talking about. The Bain article told us it's the traits of an inspiring leader. Did all the research around that. Centeredness is right at the middle of all of the traits. If we can learn to cultivate centeredness, we can become inspiring leaders. We can teach other people to become inspiring leaders. We can go into organizations and train emerging leaders to become inspiring. Imagine what kind of world that would be.
And we can help people to lead themselves. I mean, that's what leaders really want. They want to be able to help people to lead themselves so that the organization just thrives and moves every single day with self-leadership. I mean, it takes a lot of pressure off the managers too, to think about that. One of the biggest problems we hear from managers is that the managers spend all day dealing with other people's problems. Imagine the kind of organizations we could have if everybody was able to self-lead.
Yes, yes. And in order to do that, you have to know how to activate these 4 quadrants. So we already talked about, in order to connect with others, you really have to be able to activate the ventral vagal complex, know how to do that. In order to lead the team with focus, you have to be able to know how to activate your prefrontal cortex and keep it activated, keep it online. And that depends on what's happening in your body to a large degree. Okay, what about setting the tone? So one of the milieu, right? The milieu here. So one of the traits inside of that was responsibility. The idea of setting up a milieu of responsibility. I thought this was a really fascinating one. I was really interested in chatting about this a little bit, because the idea of responsibility kind of takes in a lot of parts of our system. But one of the ones that popped out for me immediately was the idea that when someone feels responsible for something, that can feel like a little itchy, like, wow, like I don't want to be responsible.
Yeah.
Or if a project goes sideways, who's responsible?
Yeah.
Right. There's all this. But so what do we need to do to kind of create a strong milieu of healthy responsibility? Right. I think from a physiological perspective, we really have to dial into the limbic system here.
Okay.
Have to dial in the limbic system, because the limbic system has a lot to do with these body responses around defensiveness.
Oh, I love where you're going with this. It's
right?
where I was going to go to.
And there's a defensiveness with it.
Yeah.
Instead of a taking up of that responsibility, there's a defensiveness around it. Like you point to the other person, like, oh, it was their job, sort of thing. So that's a limbic response. That happens subcortically deep in the body to protect ourselves, to pull away from the potential punishment or challenge or danger associated with who is responsible for this. Now, if we had better control of that, if we have better conditioning, toning of it, we never really have conscious control all the time over our limbic responses. However, like you're saying with practice, if we practice in engaging and strengthening healthy limbic responses, healthy limbic and motor responses, then we're less likely to be defensive and reactive around ideas like responsibility.
This is so exciting because there's plenty of research out there talking about how the number one thing that an organization needs to do, and this is more from a cultural standpoint, Brian, is to have psychological safety as a cultural feature, as a value in the culture. And as we talk about psychological safety and what that means, it's the idea that I can make a mistake and I'm not going to get slapped for it. I can make a mistake and we're going to talk about it. There's a major problem, though, with saying that we have a culture of psychological safety when actually what we need to really be looking at is people's perception of threat. And as a leader, we don't have the control to be able to fix or go in there and grab your scalpel and change somebody's perception. But we can be a great coach and help somebody. And I would assert the only way really to do this is through a sensation-based approach, to be a person who can actually relax their nervous system enough to accept a culture of psychological safety. And that's what you're talking about how the limbic system perceives threat. Mm-hmm. So we could have a culture of psychological safety, but still have people in the team. And I would say that with 90% of people around having traumatized nervous systems, that you're going to have people who, even though you say you have a culture of psychological safety, even though you're not actually going to get slapped if there's a mistake made or, whatever, that there's still going to be the perception of people because of their limbic systems that maybe there's a threat there.
Absolutely. I love it. I love it. All right. So the last category, developing inner resources and stress tolerance. That's pretty commonly understood, talked about, maybe not understood, commonly talked about, right? We all know that if we had better stress tolerance, then we'd probably perform better in our roles as leaders. And let's face it, like Ani said, like life isn't always a nice, happy, paved road that we're riding our bikes down. We're bushwhacking, there's thorns,
And there's
things
like,
happen.
there's life too.
Life
I
happens.
mean, all of us are balancing, life and work and personal stuff and professional stuff. And sometimes stuff is just really hard. People are dying and people need to be taken care of and things break. And I mean, life can be a lot.
Life can be a lot. So this idea of stress tolerance is really important. So how do we expand our window of tolerance for more stress tolerance? Well, we go back to these optic limbic responses again, like we had just talked about previously. A lot of the way that we experience or perceive threat in the around us will activate stress by itself. So if we had less perception of threat around us, we'd be less likely to have stress tolerance. A lot of that goes back to that idea of confidence, coherence, certainty. All those things kind of wrap around that, and that builds back into these wiring within the limbic system, motor reflexes, and also part of the brain called the default mode network. So the default mode network is the part of our brain that is kind of the hum in the background of our self-awareness. Like, are we paying attention to ourselves? Are we paying, and not like self-centeredness, like egoic self-centeredness. In order to have positive relationships at work and at home, we really have to be able to multi-purpose our attention both to what's going on outside of us, but also what's going on inside of us. If we're ever imbalanced with that, if we're paying only attention to what's going inside of us, then we become a non-effective to communicating outside of us. And if we're only ever paying attention to what's going on outside of us, then we are letting go of our own needs to appease what's going on outside of us. We have to have that balance. The default mode network is a part of our brain that really helps us to do that. That when there's this background hum of awareness inside of us, even if what's going on outside of us is completely on fire, like there's a dumpster fire going on outside of us, if we still can understand what our own is going on inside of us so that we can choose our responses rather than being just in reflexive reactivity, that's also this really core key part of being a centered leader. And that's something that, again, is benefited and created by doing core centering practices on a regular basis. So core centering fits into every one of these boxes to change someone's physiology, to help improve stress tolerance, help improve focus, help improve empathy, help improve the ability to be responsible, humility, expressiveness. Like, you look at every one of these traits and I can say, yes, 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 yes. Exactly the physiology of why core centering helps support every single one of those, which brings that idea of centeredness, being a centered leader, to the forefront to engage all parts of the mind to become fully present. It's like a perfect match. We couldn't have planned it any better ourselves, Ani.
If we had planned it
We have
ahead
actually
of
planned
that
it ahead of time. We couldn't
research.
plan it any better.
Yes. Yeah, you know, as you're talking, I'm just imagining what the world would be like if every leader was a centered leader. And at first, my thoughts went to how much more joyful, how much less violent the world would be, and all of those kinds of things. And then, Brian, my brain expanded and said, and then we'd actually be able to find resolution to some of these societal issues that we've been trying to find resolution to for many, many years. And we keep recreating the same problems. Like, then we could actually find a new way of being human with each other. And that would be the positive outpouring from a world where it's not just that every leader has to be a centered leader. If 51%, we'd have a tipping point, you know? So Well, actually, in terms of tipping point, we just need to know that like even one more leader who is a centered leader could be the tipping point. Just one more could be the tipping point. So if you are listening to this and you know somebody who's a CEO, a manager, a director, a teacher, some kind of leader, team leader or organizational leader or business owner or entrepreneur, it's such a great conversation so they can think more powerfully about how to be a centered leader themselves and enjoy the positive results from that.
Yeah. And if you are a coach, an ICF coach, you do work in consulting organizations and those sorts of things, and you're like, yes, like how do I understand, learn how to help my clients become centered leaders? Join us at Core Centering.
Yeah, start with Core Centering and the Somatic Practice Essentials, because that's the place where, even if you just start there and that's all you do, you're going to get so much value from it. We have our students who work in organizations come back time and time again and tell us they just kind of sprinkle it in. They don't even do things a lot of times that are these big drawn out. Oh, we have students who do big drawn out programs as well, but they just sprinkle it in, and what a difference it makes.
It makes, yeah.
Yeah. So thanks, Brian. Such a great conversation.
Yeah. And we're going to be live at Kripalu again, first week in June. So
that's right. We hope to see you there.
Join us there.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode. We hope that this conversation will help you improve your practice and change the way you think about your work, your clients, and yourself. Continue your exploration of trauma-sensitive somatic coaching by listening to more podcast episodes at somaticcoachingacademy.com. You could be the trusted guide that people turn to help them with their most challenging situations and to reach their most precious goals. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.